Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, tensions in the Indo-Pacific are rising as China conducts its largest military drills yet around Taiwan, described as a warning to what it calls separatists and external interference, just weeks after Washington approved a record U.S. arms sales to Taipei. As Russia signals support for Beijing and global attention remains split between crises, we're joined on TVP World by Marcin Przychodniak, a senior analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, to assess what this all means. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So how would you interpret China's Justice Mission 2025? Do you think it's a signal of some sort? Is it a show of intent, escalation, or is it just kind of a rehearsing pressure?
I think all of it, maybe. But mostly, I think it's just another stage in the same process of first preparations for possible escalation towards Taiwan. And I don't mean the invasion per se, but other scenarios that are possible. And secondly, I mean, it's also part of the political messaging towards different countries, mostly US, but also Japan. US and Japan mostly.
Right, like you mentioned, political messaging is very big here. We saw U.S. arms sales to Taipei, as well as the Japanese Prime Minister's staunch support for Taiwan as well. Now, one thing that occurred earlier is when asked about whether or not President Donald Trump is worried about the situation in Taiwan, he has this to say. Let's take a look at our soundbite, and we'll come back and get your opinion on it.
So China has been doing naval exercises basically to test encircling Taiwan. Can you explain to us what your knowledge is of that? What do you think about that? Have you had any discussions with China?
Well, I have a great relationship with President Xi, and he hasn't told me anything about it. I certainly have seen it, but he hasn't told me anything about it, and I don't believe he's going to be doing it.
Does it worry you?
No, nothing worries me.
But
nothing.
You said where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So if you're if you're doing naval exercises and air exercises...
Well, they've been doing naval exercises for 20 years in that area. Now people take it a little bit differently, but in fact, larger than they're doing right now. So we'll see. But they've been doing that for 20, 25 years.
And how would you interpret this messaging, saying that he's not really worried about it? Is it something to be concerned about, that China is trying to send a political message to the U.S., but the president seems to, not lose his composure?
Well, the exercises and the response of Donald Trump that we just heard, they're very much in line on what the Chinese think about their relationship with the U.S. right now. And after the meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump in South Korea, when there was kind of an agreement, right, mostly on economic issues, but also a discussion on political issues, then the telephone call between both leaders, where Xi Jinping tried to mention also Taiwan, these political issues, not only economic, and the upcoming visit of Donald Trump to Beijing in April 2026. So that all fits into the picture that how Chinese are trying to use a carrot and stick policies, right? I mean, they are presenting Donald Trump with ideas of possible deals, I mean, economic, but also trying to put some political ideas into this dialogue. Right, Taiwan is of course most important from China's perspective, but and sticks, right? The exercises and their very strong narrative on Taiwan and the foreign forces that are trying to influence the situation in the Taiwanese Strait. So, and from China's perspective, this is quite a good scenario that is right now evolving. I mean, the response we just heard might be used as a confirmation for the Chinese that yes, Donald Trump acknowledges their exercises, but it is not something that would stop him from engaging in serious conversations with Chinese on different topics.
Right, and I'm also curious about Russia's involvement, because their foreign minister just said that they will back China if, quote, anything happens. How seriously should we take this alignment over Taiwan?
Very seriously, and because if the escalation scenarios, I mean, if Chinese decide to go further with the escalation, I mean, what they are rehearsing right now, the exercises, this is simply this looks like a rehearsal for the possible blockade, different types. So if it happens, it also opens a window of opportunity for Russia in Europe in that context. And the way it's happening right now, the timing is also quite important for the Chinese, because it gives them the timing of exercises. It gives them quite a good opportunity to test the reaction of Donald Trump while engaged in negotiations with Ukraine and Russia, while engaged in some kind of a confrontation with Venezuela. I mean, this is also a good opportunity to test the ability to react, test the US's ability to react.
Right, you mentioned Ukraine just now. I'm also curious, do you think the growing Russia-China axis also means that Taiwan and Ukraine's kind of now strategically intertwined in some way?
Well, yes and no. In that context, it very much depends who you're asking. I mean, where you're asking. I mean, obviously here in Poland, in Central Europe, in Europe in general, the situation in Ukraine first and then secondly with Russian threats and hybrid actions towards Europe obviously are the most important threats from our perspective. So we need to prepare, but the preparation and the deterrence also has its meaning in Indo-Pacific. And of course when US is also involved in that context. So yes and no, that was I answered. They are very much intertwined together and linked. You mentioned, I think you mentioned Mr. Lavrov. I mean, you mentioned Russia saying about Taiwan and ability to cooperate with China and support China. I mean, this is also messaging, and I'm not going to say it's coordinated. I don't have a proof of coordination, but I would very much doubt if it isn't at least a sign of a strong cooperation in the same time, putting pressure on the US from both sides.
And recently we saw the US president being deeply engaged in the Ukraine conversation. Do you think that this happening right now is going to stretch the US a little bit thin? Previously, we've seen Trump taking more action in the Indo-Pacific, which people are talking about potentially putting Ukraine by the wayside, but now it seems like the other way around. Is Washington able to juggle both sides of the aisle?
Well, I think it is able, but I'm not quite sure if it's willing to do it. I mean, if you look at the recent national security strategy, there is definitely, that's how I interpret it. I mean, the way they see the world, and Europe especially, that they need to achieve some kind of strategic stability in Europe, which I identify as a way of reaching out the agreement with Russia and Ukraine as soon as possible in order to focus on different issues. Indo-Pacific might not be the most important issue in that context. I mean, NSS mentioned it, but also not very much, and not in a very confrontational way towards China. I think they want to focus more on America in general, and that's the idea here. So if you ask me whether they want to speed up the process of negotiations, I mean, if they want to focus more right now on Europe rather than in the Pacific, I don't think this is the case.
Right. And speaking of Europe, how would you assess Europe's position here? Does EU have a coherent response to a Taiwan crisis?
I would love for EU to have it. I don't think it has it. I think it's trying, but it's always in the EU to difficulty to reach out the common position on especially so sensitive issues like with China on one hand and US on the other, and all the different factors working here. I mean, the security guarantees from the US, the Indo-Pacific issue, the economic problems with China, and also China's support for Russia. So that makes it quite hard to actually achieve a common position towards Indo-Pacific in general. That might be easier, but towards Taiwan in specifically. But one thing for sure, I mean, EU is very much in support for Taiwanese, for current situation in Taiwan, and I mean, which means that they don't want to see it changed by any party without the consent of the other.
It does seem like a Gordian knot here, trying to untie how Europe is going to react to the Chinese situation. Like you mentioned, there's like different parties and interests involved. The United States is also a factor here. But if we just kind of zone in for countries like Poland, for example, how should Poland approach a scenario where a Taiwan crisis overlaps with the frozen or ongoing war in Ukraine?
Well, this is important from Poland's perspective because of what I mentioned, the China, Russia. Axis, cooperation. I mean, whenever there is a high probability of a scenario that if China escalates towards Taiwan, it opens up a window for opportunity for Russia in Europe. And that needs to be a concern from Poland's perspective. That also links these two theaters. And this is a kind of a strategic understanding. But there's also quite a very practical understanding. I mean, I don't want to go deeper into economy, but obviously any kind of escalation towards Taiwan creates a huge economic problems globally. But also practically, I mean, there are Polish citizens on the island. I mean, if you think about blockade that China could do, and it's actually rehearsing it right now, I mean, how do you evacuate these people? Do you want to evacuate them? How would you like to? I mean, but in order to evacuate them, you would need to negotiate with the Chinese. I mean, a lot of these maybe small problems, but quite important politically. Also.
Right, and I do think the ripple effect is actually going to be felt very strongly, and the fate of Taiwan and Poland is actually a little bit more intertwined than many people might think. Thank you so much for your input and insight.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.